G'day Gear Junkies, Jason here. It's been a while since I've looked at a series of Boss pedals, so today I'm going to be looking at the RV series of Reverb pedals, tracking their history from the beginning to the present day. However, I will not be talking about the Fender Reverb pedal that they did. I'll be doing the Fender pedals at a later time as a separate video. But before I begin, if you like this kind of content, please subscribe. And if you like Boss pedals, I've done several of these series of Boss pedals videos. I've got a whole playlist of them that you can check out if you haven't seen them already. If you want to support this channel, you can go to the Middle Aged Gear Junkie store and purchase some merchandise. And I've also got a Patreon account. I've got the links below in the description. Thanks a lot. Now, our story begins in recording studios back in the 1980s. Now, prior to the 80s, back in the 60s, if you wanted to put reverb onto a track in a recording, it was a very involved process. You would have to run the signal into this box that had these hanging plates made out of metal to get what we call plate reverb, and then have a mic in there, record that reverb sound, and then add it to your track. So it wasn't necessarily a very convenient process. In the late 70s and early 80s, we start to see the first digital reverb rack units that came out, which became very popular in the studio. It became a lot easier than to add reverb to instruments like vocals, drums, and guitar. Now, a lot of guitarists really took a shine to these reverb units in the studio and started putting them in their rack units for their live rig to get that same sort of studio sound. Now, the first two reverb pedals came out in the mid-80s, and to be fair, they weren't proper reverb pedals. They were more like delay pedals. So they both ran off Bucket Brigade chips, which meant that they were both analog, and they were kind of like a really short slapback delay sort of thing that sort of gave you the impression that it was being played in a larger room, but it didn't have that sort of studio quality sound to it. In 1983, Boss would bring out the very first digital pedal of any kind, which was the DD2 digital delay. Now, 4 years later, in 1987, they would bring out the very first digital reverb pedal, which was the RV-2 digital reverb. Now, I've said before that Boss have created a lot of firsts, and the RV-2 here is definitely one of those. It's the very first digital reverb pedal by any brand of any kind. It wasn't really thought that it was possible to shrink down a rack unit into a small enclosure and run it off 9 volts, but Boss managed to do it. Now, interestingly with this pedal here is that it has a battery compartment like any Boss pedal, but it doesn't actually have the clip so that you can clip the battery on because they wanted you to run it from a power supply. So this pedal draws way more current, especially by the standards of the day. It drew way more current than any of their analog pedals and would drain batteries very quickly. So they decided to take that option away from you and sort of force you to use a power supply. And they actually included a power supply when you bought it. This pedal came out during the Japanese era part 2, and like most pedals of that time, it actually starts on the number 2. There was no RV-1. Now, also like a lot of pedals from that era, we have a uniform 4 knobs, and we have a mode selector where we have 6 different modes. We have 5 different reverbs and a delay mode. So the modes this pedal has are room, we've got a medium hall and a large hall, plate reverb, delay mode, and then gated reverb. Now, gated reverb was something that was discovered by accident during a Phil Collins session. Basically, it's a way of cutting off the reverb very unnaturally. Now, in a studio situation, if you've got a lot of reverb on a track, like a snare, for example, you don't want the trails of your reverb still bleeding over into the next snare hit. So to cut it off before the next snare hit or next note that your instrument is playing, you apply a gate at the right moment, and then it sort of just cuts it off quite harshly. Gated reverb was hugely popular in the 80s and made a bit of a comeback in the last 10 years or so. The RV-2 was very ambitious at the time. However, compared to reverb pedals that would come after it, it is actually quite simple. It's only 12-bit, which means it is a low resolution reverb, which gives the sound a sort of coloration. And a lot of players actually really like that sort of low bit coloration that you get. So these are fairly sought after on the used market. Now, they were made from 1987 through to 1989, and then they were taken out of the catalogue in 1990. In the early 90s, Boss decided to have another go at doing a reverb pedal, and in 1994 they brought out the RV-3 digital reverb and delay. It wasn't uncommon at this time for them to add the extra function of delay on a time-based effect like reverb, so the PS2 and the PS3 were also called the pitch shifter and delay. Now for me, the RV-3 fits very neatly into the design era that I call the tweakability era, which was from 91 through to 1999. So the RV-2 had 6 different modes. This nearly doubles that. It's got 11 different modes, and it gives you the tweakability of having delay modes, reverb modes, and reverb and delay modes. Now, I don't want to focus too much on the delay aspect of this pedal, but it did give guitarists the opportunity to get sounds that were reminiscent of, say, the Edge from U2, with a big reverb and the digital delay simultaneously. The RV-3 has a slightly improved resolution over the RV-2. It's 16-bit resolution, and it was the first reverb and or delay pedal to have what we call trails. So when you're playing and you turn it off, it doesn't cut the reverb and delay directly off. It just lets them fade out before stopping, which I know, for example, Mike Einzinger from Incubus loved this pedal for that reason. Being a relatively low resolution reverb pedal means that this has its own sort of character that a lot of modern reverb pedals don't have. And for that reason, a lot of people really, really love this pedal. Now, I did a collaboration video a couple of years ago, and both Stompbox Breakdown and Pedal Picasso's both mentioned this as being one of their favorite Boss pedals. The RV-3 was made from 1994 through to 2002. In 2002, Boss would replace the RV-3 with the RV-5 digital reverb. Now, compared to the RV-3, this one was quite streamlined. They got rid of all of the delay modes, so this was the first RV pedal to have no delay modes, which meant that we only have 6 modes in total, but they're all reverb modes this time. This means that this had 2 new modes of reverb that neither the RV-2 or RV-3 previously had, and they are spring reverb and modulated reverb. The RV-5 was the first compact Boss pedal to have a spring reverb mode. Now, for me, I don't think that spring reverb was done well digitally until about the 2010s with Strymon. So the spring sound on this, it sounds kind of like a spring reverb, but when compared to, say, a proper spring reverb like you would get in an amplifier like my Fender Deluxe Reverb, it doesn't really cut the mustard. The RV-2 and the RV-3 both had stereo outputs, but only had a mono input. This was problematic if you wanted to run, say, a stereo delay or a stereo chorus in front of it, because it could only accept one channel going into this pedal. The RV-5 was the first of their reverb pedals to have stereo inputs. So now you could run your stereo chorus pedal into your stereo delay and out of your stereo reverb pedal, which gives you a much wider and more lush sound if you are running in stereo. Now, I couldn't find out what bitrate the RV-5 is. Maybe that's because nobody cares. And maybe that's also the reason that this is the cheapest on the secondhand market out of all of their reverb pedals. So if you want a versatile reverb pedal, this might be the one to get. It was made from 2002 through to 2015. Possibly in response to TC Electronic releasing their highly successful Hall of Fame reverb in the early 2010s, in 2015, Boss would bring out the successor to the RV-5, which was the RV-6. The RV-6 has easily the most detailed sound out of all of the RV pedals so far. That's probably because it has the highest bit depth resolution, which is 32-bit. It also adds a few extra modes on here. So we have dynamic reverb, which reacts to the dynamics that you're playing, and it has a shimmer reverb. Shimmer reverb became really popular in the 2010s. This pedal also has a delay and reverb mode, but has removed the old gated reverb, probably because that sound by that stage was incredibly dated. The RV-6 has stereo ins and stereo outs, and also has an expression pedal in so that you can change your reverb settings on the fly with no hassles. Now, as a little side note here on the RV-6, it's the first of the RV pedals not to have the word digital on it. Now, I think this is because in the mid-2000s, the word digital started to become a really dirty word in the audio industry. This came out in the mid-2010s, but of course it's a digital pedal, because you couldn't have the reverb times that this can create in a unit this small, so it has to be digital. But yeah, it's just one of those quirky things that people are put off by the word digital, even though most gear that's coming out these days tends to be digital. Go figure. So that was my look at the Boss RV series. Please leave a comment below and tell me which one is your favorite. How do you like to use it, and what style of music do you like to use reverb pedals for? If it was up to me, if I could create another Boss RV pedal, what I would do is give it a bit depth switch so that you can reduce the resolution for every single mode. So you could have, for example, a shimmer mode that is at low bit depth and get a sort of more grainy sound for any of the different modes. I reckon that'd be really cool. But let me know, what do you think? So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. You can support this channel by going to the Middle Age Gear Junkie store and purchasing some merchandise, or you can support me on Patreon. I've left the links in the description below. Other than that, my name is Jason. See you later.